Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the 72nd UN General Assembly that is being held in New York. Now, President Sisi is there, heading the Egyptian delegation. This is actually the fourth actual visit to the UN. There were 3 previous participations there. We're going to be talking on this participation, the meetings that took place yesterday and the meetings that will be taking place later today and for the remainder of the trip. But before we do that, let me welcome our very distinguished guest, Dr. Bahiyuddin Al-Ibrashi, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. I'd also like to welcome Dr. محمد Abdalhalim, the political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out this report regarding the 72nd UN General Assembly and the Egyptian President's participation there in New York, and we'll be right back.
The 72nd regular session of the UN General Assembly convened at the UN headquarters in New York on Tuesday. The general debate opened with a focus on the theme focusing on people, striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. In preparations for the 72nd session of the UN General Assembly, the UN has released documents related to its agenda items on education, environmental conventions and social development. The president of the 72nd session of the Assembly identified 6 overarching priorities for his tenure following his session: making a difference in lives in ordinary people, prevention and mediation for sustaining peace, migration, political momentum for the SDGs and climate, human rights and equality, including equal opportunities for genders and the quality of events organized by the presidency. A number of events will take place in parallel to the opening of the session, including Global Goals Week 2017 and Climate Week NYC 2017. President Abdel-Fattah-Sisi is participating in the UN General Assembly gathering, where he is also expected to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. According to presidential spokesman Ambassador Al Youssef, President al-Sisi is set to address the gathering with comments on the Middle East issues and counter-terrorism efforts. During his meeting with the UAE's Minister of Foreign Affairs Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President al-Sisi shed light on the importance of joint Arab action as means to face destabilization attempts in the region. Al-Sisi stressed the importance of developing bilateral relations between Egypt and the UAE in different fields, describing it as a distinct relationship. The President and Foreign Minister Nahyan had discussed the general meetings. Nahyan praised the intensive coordination and consultations between the Arab countries, which have to work together against attempts to threaten security of the Arab people. The meeting was attended by the Foreign Minister Shukri and organs of the UN, when the only one in all member states which have equal representations, one nation, one vote. All 193 member states of the United Nations are represented in this unique forum to discuss and work together on a wide array of international issues covered by the UN Charter, such as development, peace and security, international law, etc. In September, all the members meet in the General Assembly Hall in New York for the annual General Assembly session.
Egypt-US extended strategic relations. President Sisi to address the United Nations General Assembly to revitalize new aspirations. Egypt-US, new horizons of cooperation. President Sisi to address the United Nations General Assembly for the 3rd time.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off our discussion right away now, Dr. Abdalhalim, this is the 4th time the President goes to New York to participate in the UN assemblies and sessions. before we swing into what's going on this time around, how would you evaluate the participation the past 3 times, and what did we achieve so far from the previous visits?
Right. The UN General Assembly would seem to be acquiring very much distinguished authority and very much special significance this time. Rightly so, as you might have said at the very beginning, that is supposed to be the 3rd time for His Own Excellency Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi to attend, and the 1st for Donald Trump. That would make it a bit different, actually, so to speak. During the course of the previous 3 years, the sort of the summit, the sort of the meeting that is to be held annually, actually, on an annual basis, I would say, is such, a regular session to be held every now and again towards the mid of September. But nowadays, I would feel that the timing itself would acquire an added significance, would seem to be quite very much crucial on both the local level and the international arena in the meantime. For one thing, actually, it comes at the early beginning for the journey of preparation on the part of the presidential authority, Mr. Fattah al-Sisi, actually, for the what you might call the Egyptian presidential race, a sort of notifying and drawing the attention of all the world, not only the Mediterranean countries, but actually the Western world in the meantime, particularly the United States of America, to the goals and achievements and, the prosperous ends, actually, that are to be achieving on every now and again on a daily basis. During the course of the previous 3 years, we have got a large number of achievements and very much industrious, very much progressive goals that are to be attained. At one level, on the local arena, you can really find that a great deal is being paid on the part of our own armed forces as much as police authorities to stabilize the what you might call issues of safety and security. To a greater extent, Egypt is to be playing a very distinctive role in the Middle East in combating terrorism, in eradicating terrorist acts, and by common consensus of opinion, as much as the general agreement even of Donald Trump himself, who said a word today in his own inaugurative talk at the summit of the distinctive role that is to be played by Egypt, how he recommended the achievements and the goals that are to be gained at the end of the day. Particularly, Egypt nowadays is assuming what you might call a non-permanent seat, actually, in the UN Security Council. This is at one stage. At another, actually, it assumes, again, a sort of solidarity, a sort of safety and security in the African Union in the meantime. On a third stage, actually, you can really find a sort of great deal of success that is to be achieved in peacekeeping, achieving the 7th distinctive stage, a sort of an international record by common consensus of opinion. Apart from, the sort of, the tussles and the struggles and the sort of the draining of the relationship with the new American administration during the course of the previous 2 weeks, I really anticipate signs of great deal of success and very much mutual interest and cooperation, actually, with the American administration, as might be anticipated, actually, from the words of Donald Trump today. Yes. So to a greater extent, actually, it seems to be quite very much crucial, very much adding what you might call and acquiring very much intensive significances, actually. Apart from the previous 3 sessions that are to be inaugurated during the course of the previous years regularly, I think that his first meeting with Donald Trump as the most powerful, iconic, supernatural, I would say, president, doing a great deal of effort, actually, to neutralize and to bring together, actually, all the worst at one go. The very much famous man of being an arrogant to a greater extent, as might be inaugurated from his own words today, about America first and about the American dream, about the aspirations and the wishes and the dreams of doing all what could be done, actually, at one stage, just in the sake of interests of the American citizens, with the view of isolating any other sort of interest that might not be of great benefit for his own people.
Definitely. Dr. Ibrashi, now, there are so many issues and files really related to the UN General Assembly, but let's focus on the Egyptian side of things. Now, this is the 4th time. What are we looking to achieve this time around? We've seen the President actually meeting yesterday and today with the UAE Foreign Minister, the Saudi Ambassador to Washington, today with the Serbian and Cypriot and Brazilian counterparts, with the Palestinian President. We've seen many meetings, and in a short while the President will address the Assembly. So what are we actually looking for as a nation from our participation within the UN General Assembly, keeping in mind that we have an unpermanent seat within the UN Security Council that will end in October this year?
Well, I'm not so sure that there is that much to achieve in the conference as such. The conference is about human development, it's about environmental issues, it's about certain refugee concerns and stuff like this. And mostly, I don't think that this is the main driver from an Egyptian point of view. It is good to attend, but that's not the main issue. It is the side meetings around the General Assembly, which are not related to the topic of the General Assembly itself, that could be of interest. And it probably will deal with completely separate issues from the issues dealt in the conference itself. So there is, and of course, most of the issues are related to the regional challenges that Egypt is facing in how to unify its position and how to proceed with the UAE and the Saudis in relationship to the response that has been made by Qatar, which doesn't seem to be quite responsive to the that have been imposed on it. There will be a broader meeting. There was a meeting with Netanyahu, and it's not very clear till now what was discussed and to what extent will it have any impact on this, the regional issue and issues of peace. And then, of course, most importantly will be the meeting with Trump himself. And what is Egypt wanting from the United States? I mean, we definitely need some sort of a boost to our economic challenges. So it's probably not going to be coming in terms of direct aid, but if there is any assistance that the U.S. can give in terms of Egyptian exporters, in terms of FDIs, foreign direct investment, or something of that sort, this is probably will be discussed.
Yes. Dr. Abdulhalim, now, what should we expect from the speech that will be given by President Sisi to the UN General Assembly? Well, we can't really know exactly what he's going to say, but the issues that he might raise and how effective do you think the speeches are, not just by President Sisi, but by all the world leaders who are addressing the Assembly? How seriously are they being taken into consideration?
Part and parcel of his own deep interest, actually, during the course of the previous 3 years, during, his own presidency, actually. The man was very much interested of pushing the Egyptian citizen into a bit forward, of stabilizing the Egyptian economic status quo, the sort of the liberalization of the Egyptian pound and the sort of success that we have achieved during the previous 6 months is a clear testimony to the fact that how industrious the man is, how great effort is to actually, every now and again, just by way of maximizing the standard of living of each single individual Egyptian citizen. This is as far as the economic standpoint is very much concerned. Concerning world peace, as much as securing and saving our own borderlines, this is another issue. To a greater extent, Mr. President Fattah Sisi is very much aware of the threatening voices, of the extreme sense of menaces every now and again, of how he is supposed to be the first initial, president in the Middle East area, and perhaps to a greater extent of the whole world, who would, warn all the Western world, including the United States of America, of how dangerous the extremists and the activists of all these, racial discourse are. To a greater extent, actually, since about 4 or 5 months ago, he, did define, rightly so, what's meant by terrorism, actually. despite the fact that it would seem to be quite very much difficult, representing the fact that it is not only the man who would carry guns, or even, you know, extreme sense of weapons every now and again. It's not only the sort of the man, no matter he or she may be, who would assassinate the lives of a large number of victimized innocent people here, there, and everywhere. But in the meantime, those countries that would obtain, that would resource, that would provide, that would finance, and would obtain all these terrorists. During the course of the 7th, during the course of the last year, the fact that he was referring actually to those countries that are very much, you know, abiding terrorists and providing financially, medically, those terrorist actions actually. I think that during the course of this session, everything would seem to be quite so late open for discussion. So quite straightforwardly done actually. Qatar did not abide by the regulations of what you might call Riyadh Treaty in 1913 and in the complementary agenda in 2014. Rex Tillerson every now and again is in the habit of going to the Doha actually, exchanging agendas of understanding and discussing how peaceful it would seem to be the role of Qatar if it turns out to be the extreme opposite of it. How it would so go side by side with the Gulf area and the Gulf countries actually. But to no avail, the fact that the Qatari authorities are denying and rejecting any sort of peace initiatives actually, neither from the United States of America nor even from the 4 boycott countries actually, that is United States Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, as much as Bahrain. Today, Mr. Sameh Shukri, the foreign minister, actually is insisting in his own press conference actually about how the 4 boycott countries actually are insisting every now and again on regulating and organizing actually the 13 conditions and the 6 orders that are to be ordained upon Qatar. Had it not been for that sort of ordination of all these conditions, I think that Qatar wouldn't be part and parcel of the Arab League. That's why the main insistence, I think, and the major guidelines and regulations, the main standpoints actually of the presidential speech would seem to be quite very much addressing world peace, securing the border lines, apart from the climate change, apart from the problem of refugees, and apart from this and that. I think that Mr. President of the Sisi is very much concerned and is very much aware of how difficult the situation of all the Gulf area is, as much as the Mediterranean, as it was to be before.
Well, regarding the situation with Qatar, is this session a good... would you get a sense of the kind of international support to the Arab Quartet, the 4 countries
so.
against Qatar? Or is it a question of public opinion, trying to get the public opinion on the side of the 4 Arab countries, the international community, the other world leaders? Where are they in regards to the situation with Qatar?
I would really endorse the fact that I think that the Qatari situation is going to be discussed and laid for discussion so openly and so straightforwardly. Internationalizing the diplomatic affairs as much as the consulatic attempts on the part of the 4 Arab countries, of the boycott countries actually, to try to normalize their own relations with specific means with Qatari authorities. But to no avail, as I must said at the very beginning, that Sheikh Tamim is evading and very much escaping every now and again the sort of, reaching to a final way through the aid of which you could really finalize the whole problem. Despite, to outward seeming, the American administration is very much concentrating every now and again on the Qatari situation, on the stoppage of providing for terrorist acts and extremists. But, Tamim seems to be quite evading that sort of summit. Is a hotbed, I might have said, is a sort of a very suitable chance for, representing and highlighting and concentrating the zoom of the camera on the dire situation of the Qatari regime as it might have been during the course of the previous 4 months, in much the same way that it would leave no doubt on the part of the international arena of how peaceful actually the attempts of these 4 boycott countries is, in much the same way the sort of the active role that's being played actually by the presidential authority, Mr. President of the Sisi. That's why I would really say that this is a very suitable chance on an international arena actually to publicize the sort of the thing that might at some other concepts and respects actually be very much taciturnally represented on and upon. But what would seem to be quite a amazing, and to my own amazement, my own astonishment, the fact that today is Donald Trump what, actually, despite the fact that we talk about, you know, Venezuela, about Colombia, about Russia, about Turkey, and about, you know, I mean, the Florida hurricane and that sort of thing, and how he's very much concentrating on the welfare and safety and security of the American citizen. The fact that, to my own amazement, to my own astonishment, seems to be quite evading every now and again the thought of the Qatari problematic situation.
Well, we'll talk more about the issues later on, but Dr. Abrashi, you've mentioned the importance of the meeting between President al-Sisi and President Donald Trump during this session. Now, President Trump, in his speech, he really reiterated the strong words he had even during his campaigning during the election as a president, really trying to eradicate all the terrorism within the region and in the all over the world. Now, how serious do you feel that he lived up to the statements he made before he was president during the campaigning, and how seriously should we take these words now during this General Assembly?
You see, the issue of terrorism and the Qatari aspect, which concerns Egypt most, is not such a simplistic issue. And the issue of asking Qatar to surrender Gezira is also not a very simplistic issue. And those are issues that are quite complicated and very controversial even within the American administration itself. And I think the meeting of President Sisi with President Trump is important as a part of the ongoing dialogue to try to put an Egyptian point of view to a very controversial issue. Why is it controversial? Because as much as everybody in the United States would very much like to stop terrorists, they want to make sure that the fight against terrorism does not extend to a fight against opposition. So are the people in Qatar real terrorists, or do they have a history of armed conflict? Do they have a history of involvement? Or are they simply political opponents? And the same could be said about Turkey. I mean, because more or less the same people that are being hosted in Qatar are hosted in Turkey. And so as much as the administration, American administration, would like to support fighting terrorists, it cannot be involved in fighting simple political opposition. So that's one complication. The second complication relates to asking Qatar to give up the El Gezira, or to surrender control of El Gezira. El Gezira was a project that was done by Qatar at the time, and it has arrived to be one of the most successful networks coming or emanating from the region. And it has a voice in the United States itself. And now, is the attempt to control El Gezira by Saudi Arabia simply an attempt to silence opposition, or is it because of something else? I mean, and those are very touchy questions, because President Trump cannot be perceived to be a part of fighting the freedom of speech. He cannot be a part of fighting opposition against peaceful opposition against one of his allied regimes. And those are the very delicate questions that probably will not be the best place, in my opinion, very humble opinion, to discuss openly in a session like the United Nations, because it will elicit unpredictable responses. And those are things that will be probably better discussed behind closed doors and have very, very complicated dimensions and are not as simplistic as one would initially feel they are.
Yes. Well, you've mentioned as well that during that meeting probably there will be economic issues being discussed, trying to really push the Egyptian economy forward. Now, this is not the first time Egypt actually participates in economic talks with the U.S. During the previous visit of President Sisi to Washington, he met many business representatives in Washington. Also, this time around, he met the United States Chamber of Commerce, along with many American investors. Putting aside the military aid coming from the U.S., how much did we achieve during the first visit, and what should we expect after this the second batch of meetings?
I think you are asking an incredibly interesting question, and that's an opportunity for us to do great achievements. Why? Why are there very little FDIs coming from the U.S.? Mainly because of the feeling that it's an incredibly bad neighborhood. I mean, the Middle East now is not so attractive, neither for tourism nor for investment. And that's the truth. I mean, it's, one is not happy about it, but when you look around and see what's happening in the region, you can understand why. And here, this is the opportunity for President Sisi to go, explain his security achievements, explain why he believes that those security achievements are systemic and not simply repressive security measures, but a systemic eradication of those threats, security threats. And this is an incredibly powerful message to bring them back. Egypt is not a small country in the area, and it can, depending on its own policy, can create its own attractions. So I think this is an area which would be quite possible to gain significant achievements. It's not simply a meeting, but it's a process. And, you know, so there was a meeting, and then there will continue to be other meetings. There will be a measure of what has been their experience, and hearing from the head of the state and his commitment to solve problems. I think this will bring, will contribute greatly to the potential of hosting FDIs again.
Yes. Dr. Abdulhalim, now Egypt, as you've mentioned, it really worked on portraying the right and true image of the country in the international community over the past sessions and participations, Egyptian participations. Now, could we use, after the meeting actually, yesterday between President Sisi and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, could we use our own efforts to unite the Palestinian divisions in order to move the peace process forward between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Should this be something that would be a good point for us in front of the UN and the international community as a whole, that would in turn really reflect a positive, structured system that we're going through, whether politically or economically, over the past few years?
Absolutely right. The nightmarish aspect that would seem to be quite threatening and very much attacking all people and all countries actually is the Palestinian case. Successfully enough and very much, you know, I mean, great deal of industriousness on the part of Mr. Sisi that before he, you know, I mean, would take off actually and would leave the Egyptian territorial land, there was a sort of consummation of bringing together the two different opinions actually, that's Fatah on the one hand and Hamas on the other. This is, you know, a great deal of testimony to the fact that how successful the attempts. Of course, it's not all of a sudden, it's not to be done, you know, just in one day or one night. It is the, you know, the result of a large number of previous efforts actually on the part of Mr. Samah Shukri and the soft diplomacy as being headed by Mr. Sisi. The fact that since about 6 months ago that we are doing a great deal of industrious efforts actually in the part of Hamas on the one hand and then Fatah on the other, bringing this and that, and trying to bridge the gap and to fill the gap actually between this and that at a time that it would seem to be quite impossible actually bring the two parties together. So, I would really say that, Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, when he comes actually to sit and talk actually with Ismail Haniyeh actually for the first time actually in Egypt, an Egyptian territorial land, bringing and discussing, selecting and rejecting and touching on and upon points of mutual interest as much as that sort of representation on the part of Ismail Haniyeh when he would discard of his own Caesar of the Gaza Strip and would open the way to a wide open for discussion for, straightforward elections actually. This is another clear testimony to the fact that how massive and how very much industries and very much successful the role that is being played by our own soft diplomacy actually of trying to solve the problematic situation, the everlasting and the perpetual tussle that towards seeming actually would seem to be quite without an end. And I think that sort of meeting actually and that sort of bringing together the two disparate parties, that's Hamas on the one hand and Fatah on the other, represented by two distinctive, discoordinated two different types of men. That is Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen on the hand, as I just said, and Ismail Haniyeh is being represented and fortified by today's meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who would seem to be quite for a great period of time during the course of previous negotiations, very much evasive, very much quite far away from being straightforward negotiator. From today's meeting, actually, I can really say that the problematic situation of the two-state solution is going to be solved in the due course of time, apart from the false allegations on the part of the other, what you might call very much inimical mass media that would propagate for the failure on the part of the presidential authority to try to solve that sort of problem would come to no avail. The fact that apart from the minimization of the American aid, apart from the sort of the straining in the relations between America on the one hand and Egypt on the other, I think that sort of meeting the inauguration of the talk on the part of Donald Trump will pacify all the issues, and so far as it's a sort of a role that is to be undeniable actually. Even Donald Trump, no matter how different his own point of view with the presidential authority, Mr. Fattah al-Sisi, the fact that he cannot really deny the sort of the massive role of bringing together, of solving the problematic situation, of bridging the gap, of easing the tussles actually, of trying to bring on the face of the table actually points of mutual interest and mutual concern. The role that is to be played actually, I would insist if now and again by Egypt as a a big player of the peace process, not only for the Arab countries, but also I think as a mediator for other Western countries in the meantime is undeniable.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, also Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry discussed a lot of humanitarian issues within the UN and with the ICG officials. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Egypt-US extended strategic relations. President al-Sisi to address the United Nations General Assembly to revitalize new aspirations. Egypt-US, new horizons of cooperation. President al-Sisi to address the United Nations General Assembly for the third time.
On the sidelines of the 72nd session of the UN General Assembly in New York, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry held meetings on improving humanitarian response and conflict resolutions in the Middle East and Africa. The minister is also scheduled to attend a high-level meeting on combating online terrorism, a series of ministerial meetings on the Middle East, Syria, South Sudan and Central Africa, as well as the meetings of the Group of 77 G77 and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The top diplomat held talks with senior figures from the United Nations and International Crises Group, discussing deteriorating humanitarian conditions in the Middle East and ways of reducing human suffering. Foreign Minister spokesperson Ahmed Abu Zaid said that Shoukry had met in New York with the UN's top officials on humanitarian assistance and coordinations aid. Mark Lowcock, as well as Jean-Marie, who's the president of the ICG, a non-profit organization that seeks to prevent and resolve international crises. He said that Minister Shukri is taking part in debate starting on Tuesday. The debate will focus on the theme of focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. According to Abu Zaid, Shukri and Lowcock discussed living conditions in Gaza and the dire humanitarian situation in Yemen, highlighting the need to boost aid's effort for the Yemeni people who are facing an unprecedented crisis. The UN official praised Egyptian efforts in the field of humanitarian aid and his hopes for further cooperation in that field. For his part, Shukri expressed his sorrow and the inability of the international community to effectively combat the ongoing dangers of starvation and drought in Africa. Lowcock spoke of his vision for developing the international system of humanitarian work, highlighting the need to fill the gap between the needs and the available resources, as well as pushing organizations in the field to fulfill the commitments. Abu Zaid said that the meeting between Shukri and Lowcock also addressed the UN efforts to consolidate response to the armed conflicts and natural catastrophes. The two men also addressed the situations in Yemen, Iraq and Syria, focusing on the need for a solution to the Yemeni crisis. Among the key topics related to Iraq and Syria was the outcome of the Kurdish referendum scheduled for the September 25th. Minister Shukri is also scheduled to attend a high-level meeting on combating online terrorism, a series of ministerial meetings in the Middle East, Syria, South Sudan and Central Africa, as well as meetings of the group of the G77 and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, definitely Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri really reiterated a lot of Egypt's activities and points of view regarding a lot of humanitarian issues and the UN peacekeeping missions. But one thing, going back to President Donald Trump's speech today, he was really tackled many important files. First of which was the conflict with North Korea. And there's also Iran's nuclear deal that he obviously is not really a big fan of. Do you feel that the situation with North Korea can actually really escalate? It reminds us of the Cuban Missile Crisis that took place during Kennedy. Could the situation escalate to that extent? And should we also expect on the Iranian file that other world leaders would pressure Trump to still abide by the nuclear agreement?
I think it has two aspects. Your question has two aspects. First, is there a military solution to the North Korean problem? And probably from the tests and the acceleration that has been done in the development of their nuclear capability, there is no military solution. Mm-hmm. This has been stated by many, even American military strategists, that the military solution is not a viable option. The fact that they don't put it off the table doesn't mean that it is really on the table. This is one aspect. It's a very, very dangerous situation, but it has to be handled in complete cooperation with China. The second issue is that we have to really understand the source of this problem. The source of this problem is that the world signed many decades ago an agreement called the Non-Proliferation Agreement, Treaty, NPT, where basically, essentially what was agreed upon. 5 nuclear powers said, we undertake to phase away our nuclear capability, and you, the rest of the world, undertake not to create, not to nuclear capability. That was the deal. What really happened? The 5 nuclear superpowers continued to develop their nuclear capabilities in a way that is very threatening to the world, in ways that are making in the US, in making it more possible to utilize it with a controlled environment? A. B, they tacitly accepted Israel to develop nuclear capability. They faced a nuclear development in India and now approve it. They stay silent against the nuclear development of in Pakistan. So they themselves have undermined the NPT with a lot of incomprehensible policies. And then they come to countries, other countries, and tell them, no, now we are serious about the NPT. Okay, where were your seriousness when you tacitly supported the Israeli nuclear? Is it legitimate for Israel to threaten the whole Arab world, but it is illegitimate for a Muslim country to put a balance of nuclear capability? That is, it's a very complicated situation. I'm not trying to say that I'm supporting anybody to develop, but if you really want us to assist in facing the Iranian position, well, let us also equally at the same time address the Israeli situation. But you cannot just single-handedly pick and choose and make a big issue out of it and expect people to legitimize this effort. And this is where the complication is.
Yeah, should we expect the US to actually get out the nuclear agreement with Iran, and other countries follow suit, or the other way around?
Well, the Europeans are not ready to. And the fantastic thing that is happening is that the Americans certify that Iran is abiding by the agreement, yet they want to, I don't know, do what. And look at the history of people giving up their nuclear capability. What happened to them? What happened to the nuclear program of Saddam Hussein, and what price did he pay for not developing it? Look at what happened to Gaddafi, and when he gave up his nuclear, they were shocked at how he was developing his nuclear capability and mass destruction. So there is a question of also non-credibility of the United States in being able to negotiate definitely with North Korea and to a great extent with Iran, because if they say, we certified that you are respecting the deal, but nevertheless will not proceed with the deal, there is something incomprehensible. Or we are going to impose additional economic sanctions on you. I mean, there is something not balanced here.
Dr. Abdulhalim, now a huge timely issue that is being addressed and really put out in the session is the atrocities that are taking place with the Muslims fleeing Myanmar, going to Bangladesh. What do you feel the UN can actually achieve in dealing with such an issue, or should individual countries surrounding or really with huge concern to this crisis take matters into their own hand?
Right. Well, I think the process of answering that sort of very much intelligent question has something to do, if not, has almost everything to do with His Excellency's words, Dr. Baha's words on the strategy and the regime that's to be adapted by the American administration, the sort of the thing that you can really call and entitle as the double standards, or the double dealings, actually. The American administration, since quite a long period of time, throughout a large number of US presidents, actually, would propagate something, would publicize something, actually, and taciturnally would do something that would seem to be quite totally different. So that is, you know, I mean, the very famous words of previous President Muhammad Hosni Mubarak when he said the double standards, so the double dealings, actually. This is part and parcel of the strategy. And the policymakers in the Washington, D.C. and the new American administration, as much as in the previous ones, actually. And this is what's happening to a greater extent. To outward seeming, they would seem to be quite propagating peace, safety, security, trying to save those victimized lives of scabbages, actually, from Myanmar and from refugees and the Palestinian camps and that sort of illegal immigrants. But deep down, they would inaugurate and they would rekindle actually the problematic situation just by way of diverting the attention from the original case, which is the Palestinian case. And during the previous 6 months, actually, I think that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is seizing almost every suitable chance in his own disposal by, propagating that the Golan Heights is part and parcel of the permanent Israeli lands. And I think this part and parcel, this is part and parcel of the strategy that's to be adapted by the Jewish American administration, I would say, being just one entity. For example, those victimized lives of the people in Yemen, actually, as being represented by Antonio Gottfried, the First Secretary of UN General Assembly. I think that is very much honest and very much straightforward of trying to save the lives of those victimized people, of those escapists. But in the meantime, when the case comes actually to Donald Trump, if you trace that sort of man right from the very beginning, during the course of his own 3 previous debates actually, and his own inauguration of the, of the presidency as a new American administrative tycoonic super millionaire, I would say, he would seem to be quite dealing with almost every conceivable respect, as much as in his own daily life, as much as it is to be very much economic. That's why about 6 months ago, I did anticipate that the man will try to solve the problematic situations in the Middle East as much as in the Gulf area through what you might call the economic peace. And this is what's happening nowadays. They would have to pay almost for any sort of raising of a sort of a thing that had been inaugurated by a Riyadh conference when he did, consummate large amounts of money. And when it comes actually to the Gulf area, you can really finding a sort of paying tribute actually to Qatar at one instance, and then talking about terrorism, about fighting terrorism, about finalizing and eradicating those terrorists and extremists actually. That is part and parcel of the double agenda, of the double standards actually. So I wouldn't say that sort of inauguration of the regular session actually of UN General Assembly would try to solve the problematic situation of those escapists' attitude out of those victims of Manama, of here, there, and everywhere, but to a greater extent just by way of trying to give to outward seeming the great impression of how peaceful they really are, but deep down they are represented and headed by Donald Trump, channeling as much as mapping their own route towards the most possible materialistic ends at the end of the day, that is achieving everything that is very much beneficial and fruitful for his own people. And this is what he frankly and straightforwardly represented in today's words actually. He is insisting every now and again on representing how he would seem to be quite utilizing every possible chance of finding suitable chances for jobs, of solving the problematic situation of mass unemployment, of had it not been for the sort of the the Paris Treaty, if it is not in the interests of the American administration and the American people, he would seem to be quite away from it. So a man who is very much materialistic to a greater extent, a man who would propagate something and would do something that's totally different, a man who would threaten actually of demolishing and annihilating North Korea, but deep down he wouldn't. Yes. That's it.
Well, Dr. Ibrashi, as Dr. Abdulhalim mentioned, well, it seems that President Donald Trump really on the promise of making America great again, he seems to want to walk out of the Iranian nuclear agreement. He wants to walk out of the Paris climate change agreement. He wants to really adopt a protectionism sort of strategy within the American economy. Now, does all these individualistic decisions or this individualistic direction the administration is taking will affect how the rest of the international community and world leaders adopt their own policies in dealings with their own political and economic matters, not really taking very much into consideration how the American influence will be in their own policies and their own economies?
I think you have put your finger on the right point. We started, when I started my life, when I was young, it was bipolar. There was the East and the West, there was Russia, and there was the US. Comes Gorbachev and Reagan, now there is one superpower. Then there was Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq, where the Americans realized that they cannot do it alone. Yes, they are the most mighty, but they have to have boots on the ground to be able to impose their capability, and the price is beyond their capability to pay. So they have to cooperate with others, and here begins the new era that we are living in. Not just a single superpower, but multiple areas of power that have to sort of consort together and arrive to a certain point of view. There is the Europeans, the rising. Now you look at Merkel, she is not only the economic leader of Europe, but also the moral compass of Europe. So she has borrowed from the American history an incredible infrastructure of ethical and standards, which is becoming the soft power of Europe. The soft power was before with the United States when they were principled. But now when they are becoming almost self-serving rather than having a more universal commitment, Europe is beginning to appear, and China is there. Russia is the bad boy with the big guns. So, I mean, there is, and you have Japan as well. I don't forget Japan. I mean, it is there somewhere lurking where it will ally with its. So now we are dealing with a more complex world, and I don't think that the word of the United States means, or the will of the United States will necessarily rule supreme anymore.
Yes.
It will have a weight, but not supreme.
Yes, definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, in a very short while, we will be listening to the address by President Abdel al-Sisi to the UN General Assembly, and we're going to be following up all the developments taking place within the 72nd session. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Bahauddin Al-Ibrashi, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. I'd also like to thank very much Dr. محمد Abdalhalim, the political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Islands International. Thank you for joining us.